All right. It's Dato and Dan. I am going to do another tutorial on using the Paths tool. Again, this is a logo that a customer had on his website. He doesn't have art, yada, 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 same old drill. So I'm going to use this as a template. I scaled it up, increased the resolution, make things a little tighter, and added this phone number down here. I did that in Photoshop in a PNG before I came in here to Illustrator. There's I'm going to redraw this, rebuild it in Illustrator just because it's quicker when you're working with vector artwork, rebuilding things, to do it in Illustrator than it is in Photoshop. Photoshop, basically they use the same tools, but it's a little bit more cumbersome in Photoshop to work quickly, and that's just my personal experience, my preference. So I'm going to show you a little bit about this environment, and that's something I didn't touch on before, but I'm going to talk about my work environment. I have, under Windows, I have a workspace saved for screen printing, my basic setups, and this is just everything that I have. As you can see, there's my swatch list. I usually have this in small list view, and so I got my strokes, color fill, the properties, and the pathfinder, and then down below that in another window, I group these together because you can pull this out off to the side and have that window sitting there by itself, but I group these all together. As soon as you layer them over top of each other, you can see that window change with a blue highlight around it, and that lets you know that it's ready to drop in. And you can then move these in sequence as to how you use them most. So like, for example, I use my libraries the least, and so I use my layers, transparency, my gradients, and my artboards more than that, so I put those up in the front. My actions down here, and characters and paragraphs, things that I get to all the time and frequently. And then, but another common thing that I like to do with my files, get rid of all the various default colors in here. So I'm going to select all unused and delete. I don't need those. And then I'm going to create a new custom color. New, you click on new right beside here, new swatch right beside the trash can in the swatches list, and give it a custom name. And these are just like the Pantone swatch libraries, except the only difference is these are custom colors. So I can just call this one red, and I can change. It's under CMYK color preview, color mode. I can change this to make it just a bright red, and then change it to spot color. This is the major difference when you're outputting files for separations, is you want to change this color type right here to from spot color, or process color, to spot color. And that's how you output film, unless you're doing CMYK printing, and you don't want to do that out of Illustrator. That's just another tutorial by itself. So I just made a random custom red, clicked OK. I will make another one that's a yellow, bright yellow, just or it could be green, doesn't matter, but I'm gonna make a yellow right now. I'm just creating random bright colors so that I know what I'm working with, something that's different than what I'm using on my art file, so that it stands out. Again, I want it to be spot color, but I can use, under the color mode, I can use RGB, HSB, CMYK, LAB, doesn't matter. I'm just picking a random color, viewing. I like to work with CMYK because I'm more familiar with that. And this add to my library, every time you create a custom color that you want to use all the time, you can add that in there and it pops down here under your libraries list. But I don't use that very often. There's only a few colors that I use and that I want in my library. For example, a base white, a top white, and a spot color black. I use that basically all the time. Click OK, and you can see the two icons here. I'm going over some basic stuff, and I apologize. It's kind of spitting it out there. But this is the process icon that any new color will start with, and then this indicates that it's a spot color. So as you can see, my black up here is still a process black, and if I duplicated that, it probably wouldn't even let me change that to a spot because I'm using the same name already. Yeah, cannot be used, yada yada yada. Click cancel. So I was just showing you, but I'm moving along. Get rid of that, and I'm not going to have any fill. I'm going to use a stroke. I'm going to color it yellow, and I'm going to draw this type. This logo here is off of his website. Like I said, it's low quality, obviously not ready to separate even from Photoshop, and so I need to rebuild it and then include it with another element here. This is his truck. It's got a different logo on here, and more than likely I'm going to have to re-airbrush this truck, and then you know, it was from a JPEG reference anyways, and this is for presentation, and I want to show the customer what I can do. So basically I started out with this and this photo off of his website, and I made a duplicate and then adjusted the levels so that I can see shadow detail, just pick up some information of how to draw that. Otherwise, here I'm just working in the dark, literally, and can't see all the detail information. So I use that, put in a gray background, and I start drawing some things in there that will kind of make up of a scene. And as you see, that's kind of floating around in a layer. I created a background a little bit, and then a shadow. Shadows kind of ground the artwork, and they help give it life, make it more realistic. And I can change this to whatever color, shirt color that you know, the customer might want. And let's say it's you know, he's going to go with a washed denim or something, and that way I can do mock-ups on different garment colors, and even throw in the shirt body. If I go to the website, drag down a Gildan 5000 or something and plop this on top, pick one of their colors. It's kind of how I do mock-ups. So I'll drop that in later. In the meantime, I'll show you back to the vector. And so I'm going to start by just tracing this Mike Jones towing. And I'm going to trace this white part because it's nice and clean and it's kind of giving me my basic startup. And then I'll trace this black outline, and then I'll create that red outline by just outlining the black, and then copy that, paste behind, and then I'll outline that with a white. So I'll have, basically I'm building the white part and then the black part, and then I'm working with that to use as a tool to help create those extra strokes and shadows in the background. And the same with the towing part here. The chain, I think I'm going to build, I'll make me a master line art vector line that I'll carry over into Photoshop, and then I'll airbrush that and kind of make it a little more interesting than what you see here in the vector artwork. Just give it a little bit more bling and pizzazz to it. Maybe just a tad more realistic looking. And I'll do something with the phone number down here as well. But to get into the drawing part, I want to stroke with the yellow so that I can see it using the pen tool. Type P for pen tool. And that stroke width, I want 0.25, something thin. And you can start to see that yellow stroke in there. Getting back to my palette here, I wanted to show you this. So I drop in my placed image. I just go to File, Place, and locate that file and drop it in there. And then I change the document setup over here using this little icon, document setup, and I just hold down my Option key and it drags in horizontally, vertically, it kind of locks it into place, and then I kind of resize my page. And then I lock that down. I lock that layer down, and notice I work in layers a lot, and I'll create a new layer, and it's just so I don't have this selected by accident. As I go along, I'll create multiple layers and work on those individually, and I'll lock the others just so I don't interfere with selecting things that I don't want. So I created a new layer, and now I'm going to paint on it, and I'll start drawing this shape. Some things, if this was like a continuous shape with no thick and thin parts to it, I could click in the center and draw that, and then I could stroke with a different width, and then I can put round end caps on it, and then build this piece. Build this piece, come down and build this piece, and then select both of those and expand, fill, and stroke. And you see that creates a nice line art. Let's look at that by itself. I can color those another color. You can see, give it more contrast. And then see how this crosses over? There's no little doodad. Pathfinder real quick. You can unite those, make that all one piece. And when you're creating underbases and whatnot, you want all of this artwork as one element. You don't want the two to cross over, because when you add a stroke for trap, then you see this line that comes in. You'll have a negative line going across, the negative line going across this way, you know, outlining that rectangle there. And we don't want that, do we? Delete that. So I'm going to draw the outline of the white. I'm going to blow up on it so you can see my shapes really good. Option click to start over and draw on that path again. Pull out the handles. And here, I don't need to be so literal and make this a little bend down here and follow every shape, because this is a bad shape. It's a bad JPEG. So I can generalize and just come down and make a point and click and come out straight up and make another point. Now notice I clicked here and I pulled this out a little bit, because I know that I'm going to end over here and I'm going to create another bend. If I came up here and just clicked and then clicked, it is not giving me a smooth transition. So I want to click and pull out. I like to leave little handles on every point so that I can go back and edit it if I need to. It's a little more restrictive if you don't have the handles. So there I can, here, I apologize, I'm just moving along and not telling you what I'm doing. I am holding down the control key or the command key and grabbing this handle, and I'm pulling it out to where I want it. And you see as I bend out, I can kind of push that back in, right, following that white path. And that's a little more accurate shape. Now I can option click on this point down here again and start with a new handle. And click another bend. And move along. Nice little bend. Nice little bend. Now be careful of your redirection, because when you come up here and click, you're going to be way off base a little bit. So click, kind of follow the path of where you're going. You know, you're going up here, and that handle, when you direct it, you kind of want it to follow where you're going to land. And then now notice I clicked up here, and I can option click on it again. Kind of create that bend in the shape to it. Click again, down, smooth it out. A little wider doodad. This is obviously a characteristic of this particular font when I typed it out. This particular font, letter T's, probably has a little extra thickness characteristic on that font. So I'm just trying to match that. You'll notice as you're rebuilding fonts, you'll start picking up that fonts have, when you're looking at the details, they have little characteristics about them that make them unique as compared to another font that's similar, like Helvetica and Arial. Very similar, but when you look at them, they are very different. So I came down here and I clicked on the bottom of this letter O, because I know if I bend up that way, I can come up with a pretty smooth bend down here. Now I can click here and come out and make my circle, or I can come up here further and click and make my circle. And either one, but it depends on you know, the detail of what you're trying to do. Down here, that leaves me a little fat down on this end. If I click down here, it gives me a little bit more control, and then I can redirect that again, come up here and finish that off. Now I'll look at my artwork in line view again, as I had mentioned before, and I look to make sure that that's pretty smooth. I don't see any little dents or anything in here that I might have missed. Click and point, drag another one. I could come in and make that a little smoother if I needed. It depends on how you want to do the characters. You know, do you want it to look soft and round, or sharp cornered? Option click again, drag out and get to my little bend. Here I'm just kind of clicking outside the art. This is kind of what you call follow through. Even though I'm not so literal that, you know, I'm drawing every little shape in here and I'm starting to make this bend, I'm doing a follow through. So I'm clicking out beyond that point, and I'm kind of mentally, I guess, compensating for knowing that this, as these get printed, this bend from here to here, this little point is going to fill in a little bit, and it's going to round off a little bit anyway in print. But, you know, from the naked eye, standing back 2-3 feet away from it, it's going to look like a nice point. But I don't want to do that for the print and end up making a round print if I don't need to. I want it to come out and make where it gathers a nice point. Look at that in preview. I'm all right. Might be a little too far. A lot of times I'm drawing with the path tool. I'm drawing and kind of compensating for what's not there. And you see how I bent this up, and it's kind of not giving me this, it's kind of going out this direction and not giving me a smooth smooth circle or bend kind of per se. So I'm going to kind of rebuild that the way I like it. Some bends just don't flow the way I think they should. Now this is the bottom, you know, I don't, remember I made a point here, but I don't want to make a point here because this kind of, these two are strokes that they kind of come up together. I don't know how to explain that, but as they come down, you don't really want to make a point here and then come up like this because that's just not how, I guess maybe it's brush strokes. If you've hand lettered or hand painted brush strokes, they meet up here at a point and they're nice and smooth down here and kind of fat and chubby. And so I don't want to have a point down there. I want that to be a little rounded. See, there's a little unique dip right here. And if I just came up and met that dip right there, then I would be off down here a little bit. So kind of I'm going a little closer, and I'm going to do two parts to this path. One is for that little further dip and coming back up, and this gets a little fatter here. And this, I'm not going to follow that path. I'm going to make my dip right there, come up. It's not quite a point, and it's not quite rounded like the other one was over here. And I guess my point here is that when you're rebuilding artwork, sometimes it's you definitely don't want to get literal with it, and you kind of have to build and foresee what it should be and not necessarily what you see, if that makes sense. Because as you see, there's this little, some kind of a doodad up here on the font, and that has to do with some mistake that somebody made when they were building this font. I don't believe it's a characteristic because I don't see it anywhere else in the artwork here. So this is what I would call a mistake, where someone made a stroke in the past that created this, and they had a little tidbit left out here. And when you, I don't know if you know this yet, but if you stroke something mechanically in Illustrator or Photoshop to the outside, it follows that shape. So what it does is, if there's a little point, or let's call it a nipple, if there's a little nipple out here in the artwork then it also gets amplified by the stroke. So this is what this is right here. And again, I'm drawing and foreseeing what should be and not necessarily what is. And you can make that mistake easily by just assuming that you should follow every little irregularity, such as this. You know, if I was to option click on that point and start over again and start following this path, that's not going to look very good. So you get the gist of what I'm saying. And here, I don't necessarily like how that, well, I guess it can, depending on how I build this. I don't really like the way that's coming in, but I might bend that in just a little bit. And then you can pick them up, hold down the command key, grab a hold of that little point, and you can move those around wherever you want. I'm just taking a look at that. I don't quite like that. There, I'll leave it like that. Here I'm going to pull out, and I'm making the top of my bend already. So I'm making sure that I have little handles, and I'm coming to make another point here, coming down to the bottom of my bend, draw out another path. I'm going to make this a little sharper. Option click on that point. I guess some of this tutorial is to give you a little insight on the thought process of why I do certain things. And it's more about, see, that's rounded at the top, and I don't this kind of almost comes up like it stops right there and then creates that little bend. So I'm going to blow up on it a little bit. Click on that and close the path. Straighten that out a little bit. Okay. Again, I'm clicking, option clicking, and dragging out so I can get a handle. I like the little handles. So that should work. I don't want too much of a point. So we got toe, ing. Kind of a unique shape for the dot. Definitely typically like you would see on a logo for a towing company. It's done in kind of a brush script, and it is possible that this was hand lettered and built that way, but more than likely it was a script, an actual font. So my outline red and my drop shadow black, it's got an outline black also, and then an outline red, and that looks all pretty consistent, so I can do that mechanically. But this, up here of this letter I, that's not quite the same. Maybe it is. We'll have to get into it a little further. But I'm going to finish this off. Maybe we'll come back to 2 parts to this because I don't want this to get too long. So that's what we'll do. I'll see you on part 2.